to supply both the family and its animals. As time went on, production increased to the point where both grain and animals could be sold to provide cash with which to buy improved tools and things for the home. In establishing a farm, one first had to build a house or shelter on the land which had been acquired. Once this was accomplished, the land had to be cleared of trees, brush, and/or large stones. Hence, the first settlers had to have a strong will and back, as well as some basic tools, which would have had to be brought from the New England area, since no stores or blacksmith shops were within many miles. So we start a list of early farm tools with an axe. And I've got a typical old axe. They were kind of a, well, I call them pumpkin seed looking axes, but that's a real early one there. Let's find my place here. So we start with a list of early farm tools with an axe. This would have been necessary just to get here in the first place, since history books say that no roads, just trails, led into this area. In reading about the early migration, the very first form of transportation was oxen pulling a sled. And we have a picture that we'll show later that's typical of what that would have looked like. It makes sense that a sled was used instead of a cart or wagon when you visualize the tree roots, rocks, and bogs that must have been along those early trails. The first houses were log cabins and could have been built with little more than an axe. But let's add a broad axe, an adze, and I've got a broad axe here. That's what a broad axe looks like. And an adze. That's quite an old one there. A maul, one of these things, and a hammer. Let's see where my hammer is here. Here. And that's about what an old hammer looked like back in the early days. And now, a couple of augers, they've got one here. That would be a common tool back in the early times. And the handsaw, and that's pretty typical of the real old handsaws. This gives us a starting point to show some of the early tools used in the 1800s. So we'll kind of go through these fairly quickly here. Here's a, this is called a mortise axe, and it was to make holes in fence posts when they had the old rail fences, and you probably had to use it with a maul. You'd put it in on the wood and beat it down into the wood. I don't think you just chopped with it. It wouldn't work very good. And of course, this is a canteen. Probably originally it had wooden bands on it, but they've long since been gone, and the handle is a replacement. But it's sort of amazing that one is still kicking around anyway. This little axe here, this is like a broad axe because it's so sharpened on one side, but I like it real well. When you get a chance to look at it, it has a welded on piece here because the metal split. You can see how it's made. It has a split in it. So the two pieces were put together by the blacksmith, and they didn't like the little crack that was in it, so they welded this little piece on it. This is a real early old wooden brace. They're hard to find anymore because people lost them, threw them away, burned them up, whatever, years and years ago. And this is a corn knife. You probably recognize that. These two axes here are trade axes. It's what the first Indians had. When the settlers came in here, they would bring these little axes and trade them to the Indians, I suppose, for furs and whatever else the Indians had they wanted. These were both found in plowed fields, so they're the real thing. This thing looks like a monkey wrench. It's a real old, early monkey wrench. And the way you tightened it, you drove the little wedge down. If you wanted to loosen it, you had to drive it up the other way and adjust it and then drive it back down. This is a wagon wrench for the nut on the wagon, and this end up here is a fits all. You just slide it up or down depending on the size of the nut that you want to turn. This is a little typical hand axe. It had a little point on the back that distinguishes them from the newer, later ones. And I guess we covered that. Well, I'll start with these so they won't tip over. This looks like a potato hook, but it would have had to been fairly large potatoes or else you would have lost most of them. But it's all hand forged. The old blacksmith welds and everything show on it. This is one of my favorite primitives, as they call them. An old tree trimming tool, all hand forged, what metal is on it, and all cut out. It's really quite a unique piece.
What's your theory on the potato hook?
I'm not, I'll just leave that up to you. And I had this thing around a while, just this part of it down here. And I kept thinking, well, it was a bull for leading a bull. And then I found it in a book. And it's a pig catcher. And if I could get to where I could show you a little better. What the illustration that's where it showed how they used it, they grabbed the pig by the hind leg, and to keep from getting flailed to death, it was so that this would come off on it here. And I just got stuck on there, but I think originally they probably had it so the handle would pull off. Because you can imagine a thrashing pig and trying to hang on to the handle. Not to mention the noise he'd be making. Yeah, this is another long handle, and I'll get that off in here. Anybody have any idea what that was for? No takers? It's a dandelion weeder. See, you push the little blade down under there, cut the root off, and then you grab it and you can pick it up and throw it in your wheelbarrow. And of course, an old wooden shovel, you know what that is. And we have a couple of seed boots here, I guess you'd call them seed boots. They took the old top off their boot and made it into a seed thing. You put your corn in here, and if you're going along, you could drop your corn out of it. And then, of course, they had to have something better, so they made a corn planter. And we decided that the way you'd have to use it would be in this fashion. And you'd push it down in the dirt with your foot, and then bring the corn down by pushing it into the ground. And you'd have to pick it up and go to the next spot and do the same thing over. I want to clear my table a little bit because I want to show you that rope maker over there in a little bit. Oh, by the way, if you want to call somebody to dinner, this is a dinner horn. This was invented in about 1850, about in the middle 1850s. And you'd fill this with your grass seed, or maybe you could sow oats with it, I don't know. But anyway, you went across the field and the stuff would spray out of it. This is a fence stretcher. You put the wire in there, and then you hook this around the post and pry it up so that you could drive your staple into the post. This is some old hand wrought pruning shears. This spoon, I don't really know exactly what it was used for, but it probably was used to dig out the bottom of the post holes when they were digging post holes, because it had to have a fairly heavy handle on it. And you can see where they had the key to hold it on, so it must have been for heavier work. This is what they call a bill hook. They're a European tool. They used a lot of them in England, where they had to make fences and so on out of little saplings and so on. They used to cut. This got a horn handle. If you get a chance to look at it, it's quite an unusual handle made out of horn. This is what they call a reaper's sickle, or a hook here. Quite artistic curve in them. This big old heavy-duty rake here, I personally think it was used in barkyard to rake bark or something like that. It's a little bit heavy for raking leaves, I'm sure. And this little hand-forged garden digger here, you can sort of see how that might work. And of course the old shoulder yoke, but this one's unique in the shape of it. Most of them just come out straight. I think I'll take a minute and do that rope thing now. Okay, Kurt. Set that right on the front of the table. I had this string here put on there ahead of time, because it takes a little while to get it all. But this is the basic principle behind making any rope. So if you don't know just how they made rope, this is the way it works. So you start out by putting your number of strands on here that you want, and then you start winding it up. Now you can see these wind up here. Maybe get them a little tighter. See, if you're making a long rope, the books say they would have a sled possibly out here a half mile away, and weighted sled that would give them the tension that they would need. So once you get these wound up, then you go over here on this end, and now I got to get my guide block here. Back that up enough to get started right here. Try to get out of the way so you can see how it works. on the crank too. Just turn it that way, yeah. Yeah, I know I'm in the way. Just keep going. Okay, that's far enough. I had some little ties here. I was going to tie that off. So. You'd think that when I take that off in there, that it'll all fall apart, but it well, I'm having trouble with my ties here. Yeah. It came out of a garbage bag collection. Yeah. Let me get this up here where I can take it off. Sorry, I'm in front of it. That makes the rope. Okay, we'll finish this up over here, then we'll do some pictures. If you ever wondered what the old hoes looked like, that's sort of a, I guess you'd call that a planter's hoe, like they'd use down the cotton fields in the south. But these are what the hoes used to look like in this area. Just some small one. Turn it around. Of course, it had square corners before it was used, but and there's a small one, and here's an even smaller one. But most of them, they flatten them out pretty much because they'd keep pounding them on a rock to knock the dirt off from them. So when you get a hold of them, they're usually flattened out pretty bad on the top. And somebody had a bright idea that they would make an adjustable hoe, but that's kind of strictly homemade. It's not a production model. And you could set it anywhere you want. It has little notches in there to keep it where it belongs. Now this old fork here, kind of unusual shape. Most of them, you know, nowadays have square corners, and they're all, but this is all hand forged, probably out of one piece of steel or iron. They didn't necessarily have steel. And these small forks, I understood they were pumpkin forks, because they used to raise a lot of pumpkins for stock feed, and so they had these small, heavier tine forks they used for that. Now I'll do this split and furrow thing here, or grafting furrow. This would be a limb on your apple tree, or perhaps a trunk would come up. You're starting a small apple tree. In order to get the true fruit, you had to graft the tree from one that you knew had the right fruit on it. And so you use this tool here. You'd split the end of that, you'd drive that in the end of the limb where your stalk, or whatever you want to call it, that you had. And then you use this part to hold it apart, and your little graft would be, according to the encyclopedia, I have an 1889 encyclopedia, and I looked it up in there to make sure that what I'm telling you is the way it used to be. They'd take a shoot, they called it, which comes up off in the apple tree. You've seen shoots come up off in the limbs. And it had to have several buds on it in order to make it usable. And so you'd open that up, and then you put that in your split. And you had to make sure that the bark on both of them touched. because of the flow of the sap and so on. Then the encyclopedia said they used clay and put a ball of clay around it. And sometimes they would wrap string around them, and later on they used wax and so on to seal it off. And it had to be on there for, I think the book said there was something like 4 to 6 months to make sure that the thing got a good take before they cleaned the ball of whatever they had on there off. This is just a larger version of the same thing. This was kind of an unusual coffee grinder. Most of your coffee grinders are, well, they're wall mounted or something, but this one, it mounts on the edge of the table. It would be like that, and then you'd have your can down under it there. That's quite an old one. I don't have a date on it, but and I brought some ox yoke pins. The ox yokes, we'll have some on the screen there. They always had one of those loop comes down under the animal's neck. You had to hold it on with a pin. Well, this just snaps open and that locks it on so it won't fall off. This is another type. Looks like a little key, but you know, the holes in the yoke part where it had to be kind of key-shaped. We put that in there, and then when you laid it over, it laid on top of the yoke, and it wouldn't fall out in either direction. That's why it was shaped that way. And this is another type that has a little hole in there for the leather to go through, and you just made a little loop around it, and that would keep it from falling out. And this is still another kind. You slip that through the hole in this little spring-loaded deal here, kept it from falling off. These are ox shoes. These happen to be hand wrought. Of course, they went on the ox. This would be the bottom. This would be on the bottom of their foot. And of course, the toe side would be on that end, and the other part would be to the back of the foot. This is the way they used to make wing nuts. And the blacksmith would hammer out these little points here, and then he'd curl them up and make a wing nut out of them. They're threaded in the middle. These are pike pole ends. If you were putting up having a barn raising and you needed poles with something on the end of them, then you had to have something like this. These little double shoulders there, you could pound it down onto the pole, and it wouldn't go only so far. That would keep it in place. Double calipers. Blacksmith, if he was making something that had say a width to it and a thickness, he could set these. Of course, this needs tightening up. He'd have to hammer it down, tighten it up. But that's why they had the double calipers, because he could get the 2 dimensions while he was working. And these are just a couple of old hand-made or chisel in the gouge. This is an old burl mortar and pestle. It's a real old one. This is a well bucket. I think it was probably made out of a paint pail. You can see the residue of the paint in there, but it's been ironed up and so on. It's kind of an unusual piece. This was a pine tar, had pine tar in it. You could still smell it in there, but when I got it, it was just solid black with all over. You couldn't hardly distinguish that it had the wood bands on it. I took a Bernzomatic torch and I melted it all off, and it's really a nice old piece. And the blacksmith would have had that in his shop to treat the horse's feet when they get sore feet. They would use pine tar on it. Let's see. A couple of rat traps. This one, you pull that up, it hooks up over here, and then your bait is in here. And if that goes on in there anyway, when that's up here, it holds attention on that, and if the rat messes around with that, then like that. So this is sort of a modern looking one, but you can see that it's quite an old one. Okay. This thing here is to put in the horse's mouth. You shove that in his mouth and open his mouth up so you could work on his teeth. Well, this is a tooth rasp. What happened is the horse's teeth would get sharp. They'd wear down and they'd get sharp, and they'd cut into the side of his tongue or his cheek and his mouth. And of course, you've probably seen horses kind of slobber and act like they were having problems. Well, probably they had sores in their mouth from their teeth. Well, the idea was you could reach in there and kind of scrub the sharp stuff off of them. And I brought this along because a lot of people think that that's the same thing. But this was a shoe rasp. When they used to put the soles on the shoes with wooden pegs, a lot of them would stick up through. So you put this inside the shoe and scrub those points of those shoe pegs off. I had an old shoe, a part of a shoe that showed the wooden pegs in it, and they put them real close together and in rows too. It's of course nails and stuff took the place of them, but that's the way they used to do it. This is a hoof knife. This hoof here that I brought with me is I found in the woods. It's somebody had cut it off from a big oak tree that they'd dropped, and I saw that and I said, boy, that looks just like a horse's hoof. So I keep it around to demonstrate. This, of course, this is a hoof knife that they would clean out the horse's hoof with. And this one happens to be an old one made out of a file, and they put a bone handle on it. And as long as I got the horse's hoof here, this is a buttress. It's not a buttress, it's a buttress. That's the way you say it, I guess. And the way it was used, they'd pick up the horse's foot and put it between their legs, and then they have this thing, they put it on their shoulder, and then they could work the inside of the hoof off, clean it up with that. Now, let's see here. This little contraption here has a 1862 patent date. Well, it's kind of sharp on the back edge here. And what it was used for was you put it on the hog's snout and you cut the back of his lip on his snout with that little sharp part. Well, that made it sore, and then he wouldn't root. Later on, they used hog rings. We're getting narrowed down here. Anybody have any idea what that is? You've probably seen them in the antique books and so on. Staple puller? No. No, it's a shoe knocker for knocking the snow off from the horse's feet in the wintertime. This little thing here would snap onto probably on the side of the collar, and then when their feet got all balled up with ice and stuff, you could use this to clean it off. called a snow knocker. And you know what that is. It's not too common around in this eastern United States. But I like to think that the father had some stock and Junior had some, and so he wanted to brand his, keep it separate, so he had a JR there. This is a real unusual bark spud. At least that's what I'm pretty sure it is. You hardly ever see one made like that. Has a welded on steel edge here, so that's the way they used to do. They put the good steel on the edge and the rest of it was just the forged iron. This is the more common type of a bark spud. Now, let's see, I got everything? No, I guess I'm down to the noisemaker. Yeah, everybody, I'm not? Oh, no, I can do that now. But we sort of figured that they probably used it to scare the birds out of the cherry tree or something like that. You can see how it's made. I think I've gotten everything here. So we'll move on to the pictures. I have to have a light off there enough so we can let's see if I got the focus here pretty good. Yeah, I guess that's pretty good. This is sort of typical of what they would have brought in here for the transportation in the real early times. Minding anybody's way over here. Okay, go ahead, you can just keep going through them. And that's a single ox yoke. I'll sit down here. Maybe I'll be out of the way. This shows some of those yoke pins that I was telling you about, how they work. Of course, these are ox shoes. This is not a full-size yoke. Probably about, well, when they were, let's say, yearlings or something like that. We have some big ones, but they were not so where we could take the pictures of them. And these are, well, you saw this part. There's a real heavy axe, probably for felling trees. And these two here are broad axes. These are splitting throws. It's spelled F-R-O-E or F-R-O-W. Seen both ways. Well, they would use them if they were, let's say they were making sap buckets. They'd have blocks of wood about that long, and they would take this and set it on the block, and then these are the mauls that they would pound it down through with. And the idea of the handle being like that, you could twist it sideways and snap the piece off. That one there was an old one, but never had been used. Somebody'd made up. These are where they were going to clear the land, and they wanted to get the stumps out. And I tried to find some information on stump pullers. these were used to dig out around the roots so they could get the chains on the roots to pull them out. Later, they had stump pullers that had vertical winches, and the horses would go around. They'd hook a team of horses on a big long sweep, and the horses would go around, and the winch was strong enough with a cable on it that they claimed they could clear an acre of land with the thing sitting in one place. But these other things would be used in conjunction with these to dig out the soil around. These are brush hooks, old hand-wrought brush hooks. This pick here was patented because it had this extra piece on it. It's supposed to make it better. I can't recall the date on it now, but it was in the 1800s. This one over here, we had to write up, I guess Bob found it for me. It came out of the Ithaca Journal, and it told about two college professors inventing this with the arms on it. And they had some reason why it was so much better than anything else. And of course that's the bark spud. That's just the bark spud. And this was a log cabin that I believe was back on hills up in Upper Fairfield. And we got three views of this old house here. It was up in West Canada, and it was, according to the history of the area, it was the first frame house. Ones before that had all been log cabins, and this was the first frame house. Well, that house over there is still standing, the one on the other side. But this has been gone for, well, I think they might have taken it down in the 1950s. This is another view of it. You can see the other house in the background. Like I say, that's still there. Roy Arrington lived in that house for a number of years. And this old plow here was real early. The story that went with it was brought up from Owego. And the person that brought it up carried it up. Didn't, well, I guess he probably couldn't get it on horseback or something. Anyway, that was the story that went with it. Just the other side of it. Wooden mold board and all this. It's all hand forged, and the nails and everything that are in it are all handmade. And this is that cedar I have here. And these are called cyclone cedars. And they're sort of the same principle, only they crank on them, and this part here spins around that broadcasts the seed, sprays it out and all that. And that's the corn planter here we have, and this is another one that's quite bulky. It's an old wooden one. And that, of course, is a more modern kind that you see more often. These are all potato planters. You look at them and you'd say, well, gee, you fill that full of potatoes and you could go right along, but that wasn't the purpose of it. You had to put one potato in it at a time. Otherwise, it would all kind of slid down and block the thing. So it made it possible to carry the potatoes in a sack on your side and then just drop one in and jab it in the ground. And these little things here would rock over and open it up after you got it down in the ground. And these old scythes over here have straight handles on them, you'll notice. And that seems to be typical of the way they used to be before they had these crooked things. And of course these are called snafts, scythe snafts, the handles. And I think that where I looked it up in the book, it's an English origin, the name, snaft. These are old rakes. This is just strictly a homemade one here. Stick and all. They brought it down here and split it and stuck it in the cross piece. These are more typical of what you see with these curved braces on it. And this was a self-cleaning type. It had the extra row of teeth, and when you raked with it, those teeth would drop down and clear the stuff off from the rake. And this handmade fork over here is just hammered out of flat iron. This one here, you can't really see it, but the teeth are hooked on it, and it's called a manure hook. If you had a load of fertilizer you took out in the field, you'd use that to pull it off inside. And then this is a typical old two-tine fork. And then this is more like the modern ones with a three-tine. These are, now the focus isn't too great, but I don't want to change it now. Take the hay up in the mow. These are all three of them for that. And this one here has a 1858 patent on it, and it has a trip on it. Well, the way it worked, see these little hooks here, little eyes there? There was a little rope went across from there to there, and there was a pulley mounted on it. Well, when you used it, the rope in the mow would come over and down through that pulley, back up and out to the horse. Well, when the horse pulled on that, of course, you would shorten this. This would be stationary over here. That would shorten that up, and it would carry it up to the mow. Well, you had to hang on to the handle to keep it from dumping itself. And it had a rope on the handle. Well, this one has a trip on it, and that's where they got the patent from. In an 1852 bound years book for the Genesee farmer, we found how it was supposed to work. And of course that one didn't have the trip on it, the original one. These are more hay forks to take it up into the mow. These harpoon type here, there's several of them. That old spiral one there, you kind of twisted it down into the hay. This one, that's in the closed position, and when you got it up there, this little lever here would trip it, and it would let this thing slide up. Well, then the hay would slide off in the fork. And it probably had a patent date on it. It was so rusty at the time I got it cleaned up enough that I couldn't find it, so there wasn't any way of telling how old it is. These are all called hay knives. Well, you probably, some of you have seen this type, and this one here would be the same thing, only this got little saw teeth like in it. And this one the same way, has little saw teeth, doesn't have the big teeth. These other spade type, I found in a description of them that they were used a lot where they let the cows run in the stable all winter, and the manure and stuff would get built up, the hay and so on. In order to get that out of there, you had to cut it up to get it out. So these were used for that, particularly in England anyway. So I have an idea that may have been what they used them for here more than they did to try to cut the hay out of the mow. And that's a grain cradle. You know what that is. These are wooden hay forks. That's the only one that has any date on it, and that's in the 1860 something the little iron part there has been patented. And this, to show you the size of, say, like this one, I put a regular, what we used to call a barley fork in there. That's quite a big fork. So you can see these other ones are quite large, especially this one. That's just another picture of those two. And I put the two big ones there. You know what those are, probably, most of you. Flails. And these, just the corn knife and the reaper's hook there. These both are snow shovels, these two. And that's the wooden shovel that's back here. That's another wooden one that has reinforced places on it. And you probably, some of you know that that's a slip scraper, but this one's all cast iron and awfully heavy. Anybody that wrestled that thing around to try to dig a cellar or work on the road or anything else had to be pretty rugged or they never would have lasted more than an hour. It's terribly heavy. This is a bone grinder. You put the bones in this top part. This little handle here is like a little plunger to push the bones down. And this thing has teeth on it in 3 different places. And of course you run the crank and it comes around, it grinds the bone off. And that would fall into this area here and probably be collected out here somewhere. And there's another one here. This one, you put the bones into a trough up here and it has this little automatic feed thing in it that pushes the bones up against this thing with all the teeth on it. And the reason for grinding the bones is because they used it for fertilizer. And it was a good source of phosphate along with quite a few other nutrients that plants need, but the phosphate is mostly what they were after. And reading up on it is they used to treat the ground bone with sulfuric acid, and that resulted in what they call superphosphate, which is more soluble to the plant. But they used the bones just as they ground them up, they used them for fertilizer. And this is a hand cultivator. Like you go out in your garden and cultivate your beans or whatever. And this is a bean sorter. You'd have to sit here, and your little foot pedals are here. Put the beans in this hopper up here, and then as you pedaled it, it made this little endless belt here. That's a canvas belt. The beans, see there's a little gate there that would let so many beans in at a time so you didn't get overwhelmed by it. But the beans would come out there, and they'd kind of run along on that thing, and you could sit there and pick the stones and the broken beans and whatever off, and you threw them down in these little side pockets. There's one there and one there. Well, those little side pockets go to one spot, and then as the beans come off, the good ones come off, they'd run down that chute into a pail if you had one sitting over there. And of course, you know what a wheelbarrow looks like. This is an old grindstone. This is a heavy sled. They used to call them hog sled. I don't really know whether they just called hogs on them or what, but anyway, that was the name they always had on the hog sled. These are some old skates. There's a little threaded thing on the heel, and you screw that on the heel of your shoe, and then there's a couple of little places for straps under there, and then you'd strap that up around your shoe to hold it on. And somebody must have had a bad winter way back because they made up those homemade snowshoes. And these are carrion yolks. This one is, I think we got another picture that shows Kurt with it on, but it's like the Indians had. I guess when the Europeans come over and they had this kind, they discovered that the Indians were using this other type. Well, those are just the regular ones. Yeah, there's Kurt with that on. That shows how it works. And the old sawbuck, an old homemade buck saw, the way you kept the tension on it, you had this string laced around it here and looped around, and then you had a little stick in there, and you just wound that up and put the stick behind the thing to keep it from unwinding. And that's a little incubator, not what you call by any means a large one, but originally it would have had a thing on the side of it, like looked kind of like a kerosene lamp that would have heated it. And this is a meal grinder. You put corn in there and you can grind it up. Different settings on it that you could maybe make chick feed with it, or you could make cornmeal with it. And these are chicken water. You put the water in there, fill it up and turn it over, and the water would come up just so high, and as it was used out, of course the water would drop down, but it wouldn't come out over the side. And the same with this one, only this one had an 1882 patent on it. That's made out of a ceramic, like a jug. And these were egg boxes. They had the little things in them there to keep the eggs separated, plus the little flats or whatever you want to call them that went in between. And a person would collect their eggs, and then they would take them into the store and they'd sell them. And these are all different egg scales, and this holds 4 dozen eggs, and you could ship it. You put it on the train and send it to Grandma or whoever you wanted to, lined with things so they wouldn't get broken. This is a blacksmith's carrying tray. You'd have a place up here for your nails and whatever. This is calipers for measuring the horse's hoof. If they were going to make a shoe, they might want to measure the size of his foot. Of course, that's the farrier's hammer or a blacksmith's hammer. This thing worked like a big toenail clipper. There's a knife in it. Right there's a knife, and you could use it to trim the edge of the horse's hoof off with. This is a carpenter's tote box with some of the tools that you might find in it. I've got a full set of old tools that I keep in it. This is called a beam borer. You sat on this, and you'd use this to bore the holes in the beams to put the wooden pegs. When you made a mortise and tenon joint, you always had to have a wooden peg go through it to hold it. You use that for that purpose, plus you drill maybe 3 holes, and then you take the chisel and cut them out for the tenon to go in when you're making a mortise and tenon joint. And that's called a shingle shaving bench, but they didn't just shave shingles on it. If they were making an axe handle or anything, they'd put it in there. They use a draw knife or spoke shave on it, and you push this down, and that clamps that down so you can hold the work while you're shaving on it with your draw knife. These are all post hole diggers. This type here you're familiar with. Most people that ever dug a post hole, you've seen those. These are sort of like that, but they work with a lever instead of the two handles. You use the lever on it. This big lever here, this part is stationary, and then that scooped in under that, and when you wanted to pull the dirt up, you could pick it up. And then if you raise the handle back up, then it would, so it would dig down again. And this one's similar to it. That's all right. These are called cow pokes, horse poke, whatever you want to call them. I think this one here was intended to be a horse poke, but these were cow pokes here. And you put them around the cow's neck to keep it from pushing through the fence. If you had a cow or a horse that wanted to get out through the fence all the time, you stuck one of these on to keep them in there. Because the fences weren't always too well kept back in the old days. And that's a harness bench. It works with a foot lever down here that pulls it tight so you can clamp the work. If you've got leather in there and you're sewing on it, you'd have to have some way of holding it, so you're pushing your needle through, whatever. That's what the purpose of that was. These are hitching weights, with the exception of, I think that square one. It's got a number on it. It probably was a scale weight. I don't think it was a hitching weight. This one is marked Binghamton. Diamond Caulk Company, I think, made that. Got Binghamton, New York. And this wagon seat was made in Wiggle, in the Champion Wagon Works. It has a tag on the bottom of it. Yet it says Champion Wagon Works, Wiggle, New York. And the blanket was a blanket made in Canada. This is just another closer picture of the thing here. These are buggy jacks, and this is a wagon jack, this big one. And you'd shove this up to the behind the wheel to the axle, and then this lever here would just raise it just a little bit. You wouldn't bring it up very high off the ground, but that's the way it works. And this one here is strictly for a light buggy. And you hooked it onto one of those things that happen to be the right height. And then, of course, you have your lever up in the air until you rocked it down or brought it down, and there's a little round part there that pushes that up. So that's what lifted it. And these others are metal. This is a house jack. And this is probably used for something like jacking house. This came with a wrench made for it to go on to this part here to turn it. This is shows some of the ice tools that were common. This is the ice pond that was up to West Canada. It was right near the bridge up there. So these are the ice tools, some of them. That one there shows in that other picture. It's the person leaning on that one looks just like that. I see it here. Yeah. Yeah, that's what it was for. You see all those guys leaning. This is just a big old spud here to chip the ice cakes apart. This is a smaller saw, and that's the full-size saw. This thing here is a pusher to push the ice cakes around. If you're putting them up in your ice house, you might use that to push the cakes around in the ice house. or if you took them to the creamery and they had their long place where they brought them into the next to the ice house, they could have used something like that. That's what that was made for. And of course these are ice tongs. And this fork here, that's a nice tool. But these are really unusual in the size of them. They're really large. And that's why I wanted Kurt to hold them so you kind of get an idea how big they are. But they probably were dragging the cakes along on the top of the ice instead of picking it up. And, of course, these are milk cans. This is a nail keg. They used to make them with the wooden bands on them. And it has the size of the nail stamped on the bottom of it. I forget what size came in that keg, but these, of course, are strainers for this. This old pail has a strainer right in it. And that's that same pail. This thing is covered with patent dates, and they go back to around 1900, Beetle Valve. This is a big enough churn for dog tread or horse tread. Churn a large quantity. Of course, this is a 5-gallon. And that's the same churn, and this is a crockery churn. There's a metal can on it, and paddle wheels turn it in. This is a daisy. That's the kind we used to have at home. Sit and crank that thing by the hour. If the cream didn't have to be the right temperature, it never would come. So. These are butter bowls and butter workers. This is just a big butter worker for where you were producing butter to sell and so on. You put your butter on that table, and the drain up on the other end, and you'd work the buttermilk out of it with that thing there by running it back and forth. This is another sort of commercial butter worker. You put the butter in there and then roll the thing back and forth on it with this little cog track here. You can see up there. That had a patent date on it, but I can't recall what it was now. These are called cheese baskets. You put your cheesecloth, drape your cheesecloth in there, put your cheese curd in there to drain. That's mostly what they were for, I guess, is just to drain the cheese curd. And this is a cheese press. You wound this windlass or winch, whatever you wanted to call it, at the top. And you had your hoop here, and there was a little block that went inside. That's where the old name hoop and follower came from, because the follower was the thing that followed the cheese down or pushed it down when you were pressing it. And this is a chain pump that I made up out of the parts, the old parts that I had. These are 2 well wheels and 2 well buckets. This old well bucket's got like a trap door in the bottom of it. It's a round weighted thing, so when you dropped it in the water, it would fill with water, and then when you went to lift it up, of course, it would seal it off so the water wouldn't come out. And this one here is the one that we had here. And that's an old pump, like probably a good many of them around the country looked like that for a long time. These are old pump valves, or pump plungers. There would have had to have been a little valve in there, so when you had your handle and dropped the plunger down,
and went to pull it back up, that little valve would close it off. But these were out of some old wooden pumps. Of course, I didn't have the pumps, but I saved the valves when I run onto them because they're quite old and unique with that leather gasket or whatever you want to call it around them to seal off the water. And the brooms, they were made by, you take a stick of wood and you slivered the bottom of the end of the stick of the wood, then you started up here and you slivered that all off and bent it down, and you tied it so that the thing turned into a broom. And this is strictly paint, old paint stuff. This offers a $20 gold piece if you can find any impurity or anything in their paint. It's just another paint. If you bought a gallon of paint or a 2-gallon or whatever, it would come in these wooden pails. And this one is same thing. It would have had paint in it when it came. I don't think you can see that, but it says on there that that's rubber paint. That you think that latex paint is a new invention, but it wasn't. They had what they called rubber paint way back in those days. And these brushes, they all have these little spiky handles onto them. And I still like to know why, but just little narrow things. And that's a hogshead barrel. It's quite, I don't know, I put the kids in there thinking it would show the size of the barrel, but the kids are too big. It doesn't show the size of the barrel very well. Because actually that's quite a large barrel. All wooden stave. That's another one of those wooden staved nail kegs. There's one up there, a tub that says wooden stave, or wooden hoops. These others are somewhat more modern, but this basket here is made out of oak. It's really a nice basket, in nice shape, and it looks to me like it holds a little more than a bushel. But this thing was used to hoist feed from the first floor up to the second floor, and it had a winch up in the upper floor. You could stand there and crank it and bring that basket up with a feed into it for whatever you were going to feed it. You wanted to put a feed in and run it back down some chutes to the hogs or whatever. These are hetchels for flax work. When you were making linen, you had to start out with flax. Well, this real coarse one up here, you'd have your handful of flax and you would whack it down onto that, and it would take the bolls, which is where the flowers were on the flax plant. You could rake them off with that. Well, then these other things here would, after you got the flax properly treated and everything, then you could comb the fibers out in those hetchels. And these are also combs for that. These are wool cards here. And of course that's a spinning wheel. And that's a flax wheel. And that's a yarn wing. And you have to put in the other one. We got a few more in the other. Huh? I'll get it. Yeah, they can hang on a little longer. kitchen tools. That's a trivet for setting things up high off the coals next to the fire. Toaster. And that's called a rotating gridiron. You could lay your meat or your kettle or whatever on there, and you could turn it around to get it hot on different sides. That's another gridiron. And this is would be a trivet with a small skillet sitting on it. And that's a fireplace pancake hung onto the arm. And that's no, sorry. These are all mortar and pestle. Well, let's back that up. I want to show them these. These are ceramic ones. They're rounded in the bottom. Real heavy crockery type thing. These are sieves. You could clean your grain, whatever. These are grain measures, like you might feed the horse a quart or 2 quarts or whatever these hold. You'd have to have those measures. And this is a fairly large kettle. That one is, well, sort of ordinary size. But this is a large kettle, like you'd heat water for do your laundry. And this is a wash tub. And this plunger thing here, you put some of your laundry in a tub and you wanted to work on it. That's what that was for. Scrub board, that's a wooden scrub board. An old wringer made out of the wooden rollers. This is a boot jack. You could hang onto the handle, stand on that end with one foot, pull your boot off with the other. Then you could just take the thing and hang it back up on the wall. And this washing machine here, it didn't have a gentle cycle. It was strictly a hard scrub. And this is the one, quite a few of you have seen this. We had it up here to the village thing last summer there, a year ago. It was made in Candor, and it was patented in 1887. And you took this handle here and you worked it back and forth. There's a plunger that comes in there inside that pushed the clothes back and forth. Then you had this thing which has little holes punched in it, kind of drilled in halfway in it, and you could push the clothes up against that, and then you could scrub them by pushing the lever back and forth there. And like I say, it was made here in Candor, and the fellow that made it was J.E. North, and he lived down where Perry, the dentist, lived. That was where the North lived. And as to where he manufactured the things, I don't know, whether he had a shop somewhere else or something back in the place. These are fishing spears. This boot jack was patented in 1864. The date's right on it there. And that's a little hard to understand, but Margaret stood above it, and I put my foot on it to hold it down because it's spring-loaded, and when you take your foot off of it, it flops back up against the wall out of the way. These are common boot jacks like you're familiar with. Here's a hand-wrought one here. This is a beetle type, and that's another cast iron one. These are boot scrapers. This one you can't see it very well, but it's mounted on the side of the step. This one here, you had sort of pound it down or drill some holes and pound it down into the thing. That one hangs over the edge of the step. That one's just a fancy version of the thing. And this, you put it on the edge of the step, and you scrape your boot off on it here, and these were just decorations, these real fancy old hand drawings. These are the usual candlestick, Betty lamp, perforated tin lamp. That even had the old tallow candle right in it. It's still in there. This was an old half round candle. And that was called a reed rush light, I guess it's called. And you put the rush, which was like what you call bulrushes, had little segments in it, like bamboo, but if you soaked it in some kind of grease or lard or whatever, then you would be able to light it and have it in that little clamp. And then a lot of them came with candle holders on them. And this one is a little crisscross type. You've seen the pictures of them. That's called a skater's lantern for some reason or other, because it's a small one. And that's a brass, all brass. And of course that in the back's just ordinary barn lantern. You know what those are. Yeah, no comment. This is like a child's sled would be, and that's a cart with wooden wheels. He went so fast I couldn't say anything about the horse. That just rocks back and forth on these hangers here, and it's a little bit hard for a kid to ride on because it feels like he's going to right off over the front of it when our kids were small and we used to let them ride on it, but I don't think they enjoyed it very much. These are just some old toys. That's a team of oxen on a little wagon. These are balls made out of yarn, I guess. I don't really know if they're soft. And this is just a little old tin car. It has a thing on the back, you can wind it up. This little donkey, is, you pull him along, his head nods up and down. This thing I rescued from a dump. It had been run over and it's badly mangled. The wheels were broken on all of it. But here a while ago I thought it'd be fun to resurrect it, so I pounded all the dents out of it and straightened stuff up, filled up some of the holes with plastic lead, and that's where that came from. And this, believe it or not, is our last picture. Now, these are passenger pigeons. And if you know anything about passenger pigeons, they've been extinct since 1914. And this is a robin up here, to give you an idea of the size. They had longer tails than regular mourning doves. They're quite a lot bigger than mourning doves. But the stories they used to tell about them, they were so plentiful that it would take, they told about one flock that was a mile wide, and it went by for so many hours. The rate, they estimated the rate of the flight, that one flock was 100 miles long and a mile wide. And if you can imagine anything like that, and then when they roosted, they would fly down into a bunch of trees, and they'd just pile themselves right up on the limbs, and they'd break the trees down. And their droppings would be several inches thick. Well, it would kill everything, kill the trees, kill all the vegetation. If they used the roost for very long, they just ruined where it was. and they were good to eat, and so they just did everything they could to use them for meat, and just wiped them out. So that's how they got to be extinct. And I guess that's it.